Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to After the Buzzer. I am your host, Couper Moorhead, and this is our special trade deadline edition after the Heat made one of the most significant trades in recent franchise history. They move Jimmy Butler to the Golden State Warriors. Josh Richardson is also in the deal. They get back Andrew Wiggins and Kyle Anderson from the Golden State Warriors, and they get back Davion Mitchell from the Toronto Raptors. And on top of that, they get a first-round pick. So we will break down this trade piece by piece. We'll get there in a moment. And at the end, we'll talk about what this Jimmy Butler era meant. Because, look, every team has these eras, these chunks of times that sort of define, who that franchise is for a time being. And all eras come to an end. The Heat are now transitioning to something new. We'll talk about what that is. But let's get to the trade. Let's just dive right in. First of all, Andrew Wiggins is kind of the headliner of the deal. Former number one pick, former All-Star, champion with the Warriors. He's had a good career. He has a lot of pedigree. He's an athletic, versatile wing. He's played many different roles, too. When he was in Minnesota, he was sort of a star guy. For a couple seasons, he was a sidekick star, part of a big two or a big three. In Golden State, most recently, for the past 5 or 6 seasons, he's been one of the most high-end, role players. A guy who's maybe his talents in some ways are overqualified for being what we traditionally call a role player, a 3-and-D guy, but who has filled that role as well as anybody else in the league. And he's been, really good for the Warriors. And I think if you don't know him, you're going to get to know what he can do really quickly. But in terms of transitioning to the Heat, what I like most about Wiggins is that this is going to sound a little weird, but the Heat's offense, even though it hasn't always been the most efficient offense, the way it's structured, the scheme, the strategy, it's often been similar to how the Warriors want to play offense. There's a lot of read and react. There's drive and kick. They want to pass the ball around. They want to pass into high-value situations. And, of course, this season, as we've talked about with Tyler Hero has been very vocal about wanting to play more like Steph Curry. He wants to model his shot chart of how Steph Curry plays. He wants to have that on-ball, off-ball balance like Curry. Well, Wiggins has been playing in a Curry offense for years now. He's comfortable in that offense. He's comfortable being the guy who operates, off the catch. He operates in a spot-up situation where he can then drive the ball, slashing, cutting. He's also comfortable playing with a guy like Draymond Green and Bam Adebayo. The Heat have one of the closest facsimiles of what Draymond Green does on the offensive side. Handoffs, a lot of screens, the big guy, the center or the forward, in whichever lineup you're talking about, creating threes for the shooters. That's what Draymond Green does. That's what Bam Adebayo does, for the Heat. So, look, there's no Steph Curry anywhere else in the league, and you can't have a Steph Curry offense without him, but there's no better prep for playing with the Heat and how they want to play than having played with the Warriors and Steph Curry. So that's really encouraging for Wiggins because he'll probably be asked to fill a somewhat similar role, even though we haven't seen him play with the team yet. And even though we're talking about his role and how he's filled that 3-and-D role, and we'll get to the defense in a moment, I'd like to just say he still has talent. There's a reason he was taken as a number one pick. There's a reason he scored over 20 points a game many times, more than once. And for an example, even though he has never had the highest usage rate on the Warriors, he was oftentimes third, fourth, even close to fifth during their championship run, he could still step out of that role and score when necessary. He scored over 30 points 9 times with the Warriors despite low usage. And just to compare, in the last 6 seasons with the Heat, since the beginning of the Jimmy era, since Tyler was drafted in 2019-20, other than Tyler, Bam, and Jimmy, nobody else on the Heat has scored 30 points more than 4 times. That player was Kendrick Nunn, who had played 2 seasons. More or less. Nobody else other than Nunn has scored 30 more than twice. So it's unique to have a guy like Wiggins who, he'll be asked to fill a specific role, but if you need him to go off and have a big explosive night against the right opponent, maybe there's matchups he can attack, maybe just a lot of catch and shoot spot situations, he can do that. So that's a little bit of what they're getting role-wise. Numbers-wise, man, he can do everything the Heat need him to do. He's a 40% guy on corner threes, 40% guy on catch and shoot threes. He scores over a point per possession on drives, a point per possession in closeout situations. That's what the Heat want. He's a good cutter. He's athletic. He can finish above the rim. He can finish in transition. Defensively, really encouraging stuff. He's allowing just 0.73 points per isolation, one-on-one defense. As Bam says, Wiggins is one of those guys who can guard his yard. And that's all Bam has really been asking about for years. He wants guys to be able to guard your yard. Wiggins also allows us 0.9 points per pick and roll. That's a really good number, and he's been consistent across his time in Golden State. He hasn't played a lot of zone, but you can see Eric Spoelstra taking a long, rangy, athletic guy like that and using him in one of the more aggressive zone coverages in the league, similar to how he used an Andre Iguodala or Jay Crowder or Derrick Jones Jr. Wiggins is going to be that Swiss Army knife sort of defender who can do a little bit of everything. He can take the best scorer in the other team every night, no complaints. He'll do it, and he'll do a pretty good job. The Heat, the Heat are the number 9 defense right now. We're recording this on Thursday, the day of the trade deadline. But it's felt like there's been a few more holes in the dam. There's been a little leakage. The water's coming through, and they haven't been able to plug it up everywhere. There's been nights where they give up more at the rim than they want to. There's been nights where they give up, some straight line drives. And a lot of that comes down to they don't have right now, especially since Drew Smith went down, the team hasn't had a full complement of plus defenders. They've had Bam, one of the best defenders in the league, and they have Haywood Highsmith, who has often taken on the toughest defensive responsibility. But beyond that, they just haven't had, the same depth of defensive, size and ability and all that. So Wiggins steps in, gives them a guy who's a plus defender in many different ways. And that opens up not just versatility, but optionality. Because now, after years of not having been able to play a switch defense, which is great for Bam, because Bam is the best switch defender in the world probably, well, Wiggins can do a little bit of that. They're not going to do it all the time. There's still going to be plenty of drop coverage. But there will be lineups where you can have Bam out there with Haywood, with Wiggins, and and one of the guys that we'll talk about in a second too, and they can just switch 1 through 4, 1 through 5. You put Wiggins on the ball, you have Bam defending a pick and roll, you have Kel'el Ware behind them protecting the rim, and these new starting lineup looks with the two bigs together. Look, that's a stout defensive combination. I think they'll allow the Heat to sort of recapture the identity that they are supposed to have. And, there's also the stuff that's like everything you've heard is Wiggins is a good guy. He'll do what he's asked. There's a nice little wrinkle of him and Kevin Love playing on the same team after Wiggins was traded for Love. Years ago after Wiggins was originally drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Fun stuff like that. We all love a full circle in this league. It's better than a flat circle. So moving on to Davion Mitchell, whose nickname is Off Night, one of the best nicknames in the league. Nicknamed that because if he's guarding you all night, you're going to have an off night. Pretty clever. And he ranks almost higher in terms of on-ball defense, Davion Mitchell. He ranks almost higher than Wiggins in a lot of these things. He allows 0.72 points per isolation, which is number 10 among all players in the league. He allows 0.90 in pick and roll as the ball handler defender, just slightly above Wiggins in terms of the statistic, which is number 7 among the players who have defended enough and qualified. He fits into the mold, of the Gabe Vincent, Drew Smith point of attack on-ball defender, which the Heat have really needed, especially since Smith went down for the year with his injury. Mitchell's more of a league average shooter, better on spot-ups. He can handle the ball, doesn't usually initiate a ton of offense, but he can play the lead guard role and bring the ball up. But, he's going to be sort of that 3-and-D guard defender, which they've needed, and really it does not get that much better in this league in terms of a guard defender than Davion Mitchell. So, look, we're 2 guys in, and we've already said these are 2+ defenders. You see where we're going. The Heat are getting back to their defensive ways with some of these additions. And, hey, there's nothing not to love about that. Kyle Anderson, also coming from the Golden State Warriors. He is almost the definition of a Swiss Army knife forward. He doesn't really fit into any preconception of a role. He's 6'9". He can handle the ball. He can pass. He's a low-volume shooter, so it'll be interesting to see which lineups Eric Spoelstra uses him in, especially with them playing with two bigs very often now. But Anderson was brought into the Warriors to be that big playmaker, and he played off the bench for them. He'll be able to fill a similar role to what he did with the Warriors, to what he can do with the Miami in terms of being a big guy who can see the floor and help get shooters open in a lot of the same ways that Bam does. I don't know, quite exactly how any of these guys are going to fit into the rotation minutes-wise, but you can see if you've been watching Eric Spoelstra for long enough, it's not that hard to kind of picture him figuring out ways to use them all. Maybe they're not all going to play the same minutes every night. Maybe Kyle Anderson doesn't play every night. Maybe Davion Mitchell doesn't play every night, or maybe they do. But what the point is that Eric Spoelstra knows how to use guys like this, guys who are versatile, who have skill sets that are very broad, and he'll figure out ways to use them, especially against specific matchups. He'll give them a chance for sure. And Kyle Anderson, also a 6'9" guy, gives him some length. He can guard some wings, some kind of quasi-fours as well. They also get a first-round draft pick. It's in 2025. We'll see if it conveys this year or not. There are some protections on it, but look, draft picks are the currency of the league these days. They are what allow you to do things. They enable you to make certain moves. That's, of course, very valuable, but a draft pick that's coming in this draft, well, then you have to start talking about Adam Simon, Eric Amsler, Keith Askins, the scout group, the guys who are spending all year putting together the Heat's, big board, the guys who are putting together the reports for Pat Riley and Andy Ellsberg, the guys who are going to ultimately make the final decisions. Those guys have proven over the years that they know what they're doing, right? They've drafted Bam, drafted Tyler, drafted Jaime, Nico, Khalil Ware. They found the undrafted guys and Duncan, Gabe Vincent, Haywood Highsmith, Max Strus, Drew Smith. They know where to find these guys. They know what they're looking for. They've all been with the organization for 20 plus years at least. It's a small group, but you give them another shot in the draft, and there's not that much more value in the league around for anybody with mid-first round draft picks wherever it ends up. So you give those guys a shot. They know how to turn the theoretical value of a pick, and picks are always theoretical value until the day of the draft, and they know how to turn it into actual value. So picking up a draft pick is only good for a team that's been one of the best drafting teams in the league going on quite a while, right? So let's think about this. Where do the Heat end up after this? They've added plus defenders. They've added versatile guys with broad skill sets. They've added guys who are great on the ball, guys who can cut, they can finish. Wiggins is a really positive shooter. He'll help spread the floor. What do you do when you put all this together? What's the final concoction? And really what I come back to is these are all guys that Eric Spoelstra is going to know how to use. They're archetypes that he's used before. He likes guys that can do different things because Spoelstra likes to try different things. They've got everything they need now to be competitive. They were competitive before this, but they've sort of recaptured their identity. Even if they were the number 9 defensive team before, now they're going to be even better. They're going to be more solid against all kinds, against the entire spectrum of matchups, right? Not just, good against this team on that night, but then the next night they have maybe some defensive issues. They should be more consistent defensively, and that's what they're supposed to be. That's what they're built as. So they've got what they need to be competitive. They're still playing a lot of young guys, a lot of developing guys, and as we have said multiple times in this series, you play young guys, you're going to have to live with some youthful mistakes. That's okay. In lieu of that, you want a lot of guys who will fill a role and do those roles well, and that's pretty much what the Heat end up with now. And again, they've recaptured their identity. This is supposed to be a defensive team. This is supposed to be an aggressive, disruptive defensive team, and they haven't really been forcing a lot of turnovers lately. Now they can get back to that. They can just find who they are, because once you find who you are, they know what their identity is supposed to be, but once you can actually play to your identity consistently and you have the depth to do that across all 48 minutes of the game, that's how you win games. That's how you stay in the playoff race. That's how you win playoff games. Playing to your identity. And the Heat, they got guys that fit who they want to be and how they want to play. That's a pretty good trade, however many ways you break it down. Now, look, this is the end of an era. Jimmy Butler is going on to Golden State, where you can play with Steph Curry. He can go compete for a title there after the Heat have been competing for a title for his entire tenure here. They made the finals in his first year back in 2019-20. They made the conference finals 3 times. They made the finals again as an 8 seed going against the Denver Nuggets. And just, look, this feels like one of those times where, your memories, the memories were all forming constantly. And I'm sorry to get a little metaphysical here, but your memories of different eras, they start to crystallize into these are the things that have happened. The era is not happening anymore. And what I mean by that is, the Heat are moving on to something new. But that doesn't mean, we should forget about what this last era has been. And I think it's been a really successful one. You think back, especially with Jimmy's moments, you think back on, those games against the Lakers in the finals, especially when he's exhausted and giving it his all and putting up triple doubles and kind of dragging the Heat to wins. You think about that Game 6 in 2022 in the conference finals against Boston when the Heat were down 3-2 and Jimmy Butler went up there and had a huge game and forced a Game 7 back in Miami. You think about the 3 he missed. That was a crushing moment maybe for a lot of people, but I've always thought that missed 3, that pull-up 3 in the final minute against Boston in Game 7 was sort of defined who Jimmy was with the Heat. He was willing to take the tough shots, and that was who he was. He went for the win in the biggest moment possible, and it didn't work out that time, but it worked out so many other times because that's who he was. That's how he played with the team. The team always played, reflected his competitiveness, his hard-nosed, and the ability he had to see whoever was lining up on the other side of the court and not care who it was. They were going to go out and try and beat them anyways. To me, the masterpiece game is Game 4 against the Milwaukee Bucks when they had that comeback in the fourth quarter. Butler again, that's when he's pulling up for 3. He made those ones. That game, to me, is one of the greatest playoff games I've ever seen anyone have. If I wrote at the time, I wrote a story about that. I was comparing it to Greek myth. These are the stories, these are the games that sort of get written into an epic poem. And that's what that game felt like. It felt like something more than just sport, more than just basketball. It felt like something truly special, truly historical, a shared memory that we're all going to hold on to together, much in the same way that you can run into anybody in Miami off the street, bring up the Ray Allen shot in Game 6 of the 2013 finals against San Antonio, and they're going to know exactly what you're talking about. They'll be able to tell you where they were, how they felt, who they were with. That's what that Game 4 against the Bucks what felt like with Jimmy Butler. And look, now it's over. The team turns over to what could be a new era, or it could be a transitionary period, a bridge period. Look, the team started as an expansion team. Then they had a firm era when Pat Riley came in and they brought in Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning via trade. Then there was a transitionary period. Then you start the Dwayne Wade era. Shaq comes in, they're immediately in contention again. Eras are often defined by contention. Then there's another bridge period, another transition. Then you got the Big 3. The Big 3 are their own special beast. That's one of the most unique teams, unique things that have happened in the league in the history of the league. And then there's, unfortunately, Chris Bosh gets hurt as they bring in Goran Dragic, and Dragic is the constant over the next, 5-6 years or so. That could have been an era of its own, ended up being more of a transitionary period because of what transpired. And then Jimmy comes in 2019-20, and they compete for the next 5.5 seasons, and that was an era. Now, the Heat have talent. They've got young guys to develop. They just brought in some veterans to bolster the defense. Whether or not this is an era or a period of transition, that much is up to the players. But they've got the talent to make this team right now, this season, next season, they've got the talent to make those seasons matter and to start giving us new memories. So those are our thoughts about a trade. It was an interesting trade deadline, a busy one around the league. And, hey, now we got the rest of the season. There's a playoff race going on, and we see where the Heat can end up and who they're going to face, once they get to the middle of April. For now, this has been After the Buzzer. I'm Couper Moorhead, your host, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining me. We will see you again soon. Take care.